wants to be king!
Welcome back to the War Room. Today, we're going to touch on a subject that I generally don't spend a lot of time on, either in my personal life, watching it, or talking about it, and it's professional sports, in particular the NFL. Anybody who's been on the internet or on any news network has undoubtedly heard about the fallout from John Gruden's supposed racist comments that he said in a private email exchange between him and another NFL executive, owner, whatever. But basically it was a conversation, an email conversation between two men, and he made a reference to some dude's soup coolers and called him stupid in some sort of way that makes him racist. Now, any thinking person would look at that and go, you know, in a private exchange, in an email exchange, if John Gruden was a racist, there's a whole lot more things that he could have said that would have proven him to be that would have quantified this indictment of who this man is. But this guy's been in the NFL for a long time. He has led black men, brown men, white men for a long time. And if he was indeed a racist, aside from there being much more affirmative words or phrases or whatever than some dude having big lips. By the way, he does have big ass lips. You know, there would have been something better than that, but that's really neither here nor there. They don't need anything better, because what they've got is a group of useful idiots that will take that little small spark and create an explosion. And that's what we saw when we saw Randy Moss give a perfect display of the feminine energy that has taken place for what used to be masculine. And not that Randy Moss has ever been masculine, you know, and it's really funny to me because he's willing to crucify this man based off of something that he did over a decade ago. And I wonder how Randy would feel if people took a microscope and looked up his ass and saw what a dumb buffoon he made of himself while he was getting paid millions of dollars to play a child's game. But I'll digress there. The biggest problem that I have with all of this is the fact that people that claim to be so proud and so awake and so aware are once again getting played like dumb fools, the dumb, useful idiots that they are, by the same element of our society that pulled the same thing back in the 60s. One of the cool things about talking to old dudes is you get a different perspective of history that's not in history books, that's not in your cognitive bubble. It's cool to talk to people from other countries, from other periods of time. And I really enjoy talking to my fight coach's dad. He was a young man in the 50s, and he tells stories about how black America was in the 50s. And that's a drastically different tale than the one that my generation was raised to believe, that America is systematically racist and, you know, it's just this terrible place. And I'll admit, I have experienced racism in my life, but it's definitely nothing like what these little whiny sissies are crying about now. As a matter of fact, what Randy Moss is crying about John Gruden making reference to about another man, which is weird in itself, that was actually something that we used to do as kids. It was called playing the dozens. That was, if you could crack on somebody, if you could take somebody's obvious flaws and put a magnifying glass on them, you could often make them tap. I don't know how many times I got cracked on for my big ass nose, and if I was built like Randy Moss, I'd cry about that. But it's funny, I got a big ass nose. It is what it is, man. But a person who says that I don't qualify them as a racist, even if they say it in a way that it could be construed that. People don't always go for the gut shot like that, and that's what this culture has bred, a bunch of weak, spineless cowards that want to whine and cry and call racist on everything that they don't like. But if you look at what happened in the 60s with the civil rights movement and the sexual revolution, the LMNOP movement, feminists. You have all these things that were pushed together, and just like then, the LMNOP agenda and the feminist agenda is going to vault over the people of color agenda, and that's the same thing that's going on right now. And when I hear old school tell stories about how things were, and then describe the destruction of that culture, of that community by the civil programs, the civil rights movement, and all the boy and the girl that was mysteriously appearing in the ghetto. When you look at that and you realize that these movements, these factions, are what has caused the degradation of our culture, you can see the same play taking place all over again. But this time, instead of it just being the black cause being vaulted over, now we got the LMNOPs invading women's spaces, knocking women out in MMA fights, winning pageants, getting voted Woman of the Year when you only been a woman for 6 months. And all of a sudden, our whole culture, even our children, are being poisoned by this toxic mindset of fluidity and Peter Pan bullshit. And it's gotten out of control. And the same faction that vaulted over the black cause in the 60s is using black people like puppets. Randy Moss was used as a puppet, with this little morsel of homie soup coolers being the catalyst for him to go on TV and whine and cry and talk about oppression and racism and this hurt my feelings, NFL, you hurt me. He should audition for the remake of Roots and play Kunta Kinte or something, because that was a beautiful performance that he put on. This dude ain't hurt. His dude's made millions of dollars being coddled by the NFL when he was doing shit while he was playing that should have got his punk ass kicked off the team. But because he was good enough to play football, they put up with it and paid him to do it, and now he's crying. But the thing that really strikes me as odd and just crazy dangerous is the fact that if you look at what happened in the civil rights movement, you look at how these movements put their key in the back of black people and had black people out there screaming black power, made all these promises and all this stuff. And look at what happened in the 60s. Look at what's happened since the 60s. In the 50s, black people were shooting up economic scale and they were exceeding what white people were doing. Black families were married. Children were born to both parent households. And since these movements, since this liberation, since this whatever you want to call it that happened in the 60s, everything in the black community has gone to shit. Everything. The single parent household, look at the kids on the street now. You don't have to be a genius to figure out what happened here. So the same ideology, the same mindset has got the key in clowns like Randy Moss's back. And they're crying about racism. And this is the funny part. It would be hilarious if it wasn't so destructive. All of you goofy black fools that are crying about this and calling for Gruden's head, all of you little clowns and you beta white dudes that are doing the same thing, all of you people that are listening to what this man supposedly said, calling it racism and all that because you're a weak, spineless, blind fool that can't think for yourself. What you're doing is you're cheering on the LMNOP community getting rid of this man, because that's why he really got fired. It wasn't about black folks. It wasn't about black athletes. It wasn't about any of that stuff. It wasn't about anything that had to do with black folks, soup cooling lips, any of that. It wasn't any of that. What he did, what John Gruden did wrong, was he referred to Roger Goodell as the F word that you can't say anymore because somebody's feelings might get hurt. He said the dude moved like a pussy. He said a lot of things about the way that this dude is as a man because it's probably true. And I would argue that every dude that wasn't afraid of getting attacked by this mob that's involved in the NFL, even people that don't like John Gruden, would agree with this sentiment about Roger Goodell. But these dudes are not going to speak up because they're cowards. The NFL, especially the Raiders organization, that is a disgrace that they threw this man to the wolves because of what he said about this and what he said about the commissioners and the leaders in the NFL pressuring coaches to hire LMNOP players just because of optics. This dude has been crucified by the same people that are going after Dave Chappelle. The same people that are trying to confuse our children in schools, putting out books that are borderline PORN. This is insane that these people have been given this much power, and it's up to the men in this country to stand too. We cannot allow this to continue to go on at all. This man should not have lost his job. What he said in a private conversation, at best, I will give you that it was classless. It's classless to speak that way about other people if you want to be that thin-skinned. If you want to be that much of a feminized vaginal dude, then I'll give you that much. But this dude having a conversation and speaking honestly about the way this man moves, no matter what terms he used, we're policing people's, we're not only policing the way people talk, we're going to go back 11 years, 12 years, digging through this man's email trash and use that. Again, there's so many things that man could have said that would have quantified him as a racist. But him making fun of a dude's lips, whose lips are big as fuck, isn't racist. It's not racist at all. Him making up a name that mixes up with his name and doing that, it's not racist at all. And if that's how far you got to reach to prove that this man hates black people and he should be crucified, if that's how far you got to reach, if that's all it takes for you to be convinced that this dude should be hung up and stapled to a cross like this, then I say once again, when they come for you and they hold you accountable for what you said in a private conversation, don't call for help. This isn't about any side. This isn't about black or white. This isn't about anything. It's about freedom of speech, and it's about a class of people being lords over everyone. It's not about acceptance. It's about ruling. It's about changing our entire culture to bend to a small minority. But these people are all useful idiots. These are all useful idiots that are just being used to tear our culture apart. Men have got to stand up and stand too. John Gruden has already lost his job. The mobs come for him. The NFL didn't stand with him because the leader's the one who got called out. He got called out for the way he moves. And instead of being a man and dealing with it like a man, he let his LMNOP mob go and do his bidding, which to me proves this point, proves Gruden right. We cannot allow a man's opinion to be so harmful to us that we get on TV and cry like Brenda Moss did. That's a bad look. And any black man who stands behind this and looks at what he said, we've said worse than that to each other, just playing. We should be way tougher than to get on TV and cry like little bitches over something that a man said about another man. It's time for men to stand up. It's time for men to stand up. This rainbow needs to set. This rainbow cannot be allowed to have power over everyone's life to the point where they're ruining innocent men's life simply for speaking against the narrative. We can't let that happen, fellas. Again, if it happens to them, it'll happen to you. Regardless of how you feel about this situation, I want you to ask yourself this. We have all said things about other people, about somebody's height, about somebody's whatever. We've all been critical of other people. How would you feel if your entire livelihood, if your entire life was destroyed because somebody went digging through your email trash, a correspondence between you and someone else, and held your feet to the fire over something that you said that was nobody's business? You didn't cause anybody harm. It's just a conversation of your opinion. Do you think that you should be crucified for this? Do you think that it would be justified for those people that weren't even involved in this conversation to come and take everything away from you? Nobody can answer that question and say, yeah, that would be fair. This isn't fair. This isn't right. We cannot allow our culture to go down this path. Men need to speak up. Men need to put a stop to this madness. Out.